Welcome back, everybody. This is for our class for English 112 for Thursday, the 5th of November. And I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about A Midsummer Night's Dream, and eventually we will transition over to A Raisin in the Sun, which happens to be our last drama for the class. And then when we're done with the drama section, you would be writing a journal, page response or so for Oedipus, Midsummer, and finally Raisin. And then we would talk about a second paper. But at this point, you were able to see a performance that was done in Shakespeare's reconstructed Globe Theater. And while perhaps it wasn't necessarily as clear as it would have been if I had been able to show you the DVD, at least it was a link that I was able to find for free online during these difficult times. And I apologize for all of the advertisements that you may have sat through, but at least this would give you an idea of what a Shakespearean play might be like when it's performed in a theater much like Shakespeare's Globe Theater. Though you can see that they also took some liberties. For instance, I don't know if you noticed at one point that they were using some music from the musical group Queen, a very contemporary group. But nevertheless, in terms of Act 1, we know that this is where we establish characters. And it's also a place for us to look at title. Midsummer, look at night, and look at dream. And the idea behind each of these words is that they help to give us a sense of what it is that we are going to be finding over the course of the play. And midsummer doesn't necessarily mean the middle of the summer. It happens to be the longest day of the year in June. And that's a very important day from the pagan perspective, because that's supposed to be a day where you celebrate things like fertility. And that's going to be important in terms of our understanding of the play. Nighttime is a time of darkness and mystery, and dreams are very similar to love in the fact that they oftentimes aren't real. Sometimes they can be pleasant, sometimes they can be nightmares, and we oftentimes don't have control over them. So that helps to establish Midsummer Night's Dream in terms of the title. The play takes place in Athens initially. This was not uncommon for Shakespeare to put his plays in rather exotic locations, but outside of the fact that it's supposed to appear in Athens, it may as well be in England itself, because the rest of it is very British. Athens is supposed to represent civilization and order, which is how the play begins. And we're introduced initially to Hippolyta. She's the queen of the Amazons. If you know anything about the Amazons, they're strong warrior women. And she has been defeated by Theseus. He's a ruler of Athens, and he's basically conquered Hippolyta. This would be a very common kind of relationship at the time, a relationship of power, where two individuals, or in this instance, two kingdoms merge, not because of romantic love, but because it would be a good match politically and socially. This would have been the most common type of love during this time period. Obviously, Hippolyta is not too pleased over the fact that she has been basically conquered by Theseus, and we get that sense at the beginning of the play. But we also note that we're watching a comedy, which means that we're supposed to have a happy ending, which means that at the ending of the play, she doesn't seem to mind too much. And again, very common for the time period to marry for political or social reasons, and then to let affection or even love develop over time, rather than having a relationship that would begin with love. That said, we're introduced to Hermia, who basically has defied her father. In the time of the Renaissance, she was basically considered to be the property of her father, and her father would determine who she would marry, probably someone because of status or rank. And instead, what Hermia decides to do is she wants to marry for love. She has chosen Lysander. Her father has chosen Demetrius. Now, the thing with Lysander and Demetrius, they're both very similar men. It's not as if one has higher status than another. So this gets us back to the question of power. Or if you've ever heard the response from someone in power, let's say a parent say, because I told you so. This is very much what we're finding with Aegeus. That Aegeus has made a decision for Hermia's suitor, and his decision is Demetrius. And there isn't really any reason or rationale for that. And he doesn't need reason or rationale. He's the father, and he can make that determination. And his daughter dares to defy him, which would be very eyebrow raising at the time, that a female would defy a man, and more importantly, that a daughter would dare to defy her parent, her father. We should also note that her appearance as a short brunette is going to be important, because at the time of the Renaissance, that would have been the opposite of what was considered to be beautiful. And you can decide whether it's still similar in our own time period, but tall and blonde was considered to be beautiful, not necessarily short and brunette. Yet Hermia has all of the attention of the men at the beginning of the play. Both Lysander and Demetrius want to be with Hermia. Now, this is somewhat problematic, because Demetrius, prior to the play, it's been referenced that he had a relationship with Helena, the tall blonde. And not only does this illustrate the fickle nature of love, because he's changed his mind, but it also indicates how oftentimes love can lead to betrayal, because not only has he decided that he no longer loves Helena, and he's choosing the short brunette, which is eyebrow raising, rather than the tall blonde, but Helena and Hermia are best friends, which goes to illustrate how friendships can be destroyed over love. Helena, however, still loves Demetrius, and this goes to show how love can oftentimes be unrequited. And in fact, she has some dialogue in the play that's somewhat uncomfortable for any modern day audiences, where she says, basically, treat me like your dog, just let me be in your presence. So in some ways, she comes off as rather weak. However, by the ending of the play, she does get what she wants. So that, as well as the idea that she ends up being the pursuer, which is very much a reversal of roles during the time period, where the male should be the pursuer and the female should be the pursued. Even Helena at one point says women were not made to woo, and yet she herself is wooing. So that goes to show a certain level of strength, though perhaps not the level of strength of a Hermia, who's willing to defy her father. Her father is at his wit's end. He doesn't know what to do at this point. So he decides to appeal to a higher authority. And this happens to be basically King Theseus, because he's the king of the land. And Theseus has made a decision that he's going to allow Hermia to take some time to decide if she's going to follow her father's will, or if she's going to accept the repercussions, which would be a nunnery or death. And both would have been considered to be comparably horrible at the time period. Now, we do need this as a plot device in order for Hermia to have time to make a decision to run away with her love, Lysander. But I think it also is telling in terms of Theseus. After all, he has his own love problems with Hippolyta, that Theseus perhaps feels a little bit of empathy for this couple and decides to allow them time to make decisions on how to proceed. But again, it is necessary as a plot device. And it's not too surprising that what Hermia and Lysander decide to do is what every young couple oftentimes decides to do when they are facing defiance from their parents. They're going to run away. And they decide to run away into the wilderness or the forest. And just think of the term wilderness, wild, untamed. That basically anything can happen in the wilderness, as opposed to Athens, which is supposed to represent the law of nature, I should say supposed to represent the law of man, not the law of nature, and the law of order. So the settings between Athens and the wilderness is important in terms of the context of the play. And we also are introduced to the fairy world, where we have Fairy Oberon, who's fighting with his wife, Fairy Titania. Basically, they're fighting over a changeling boy. Changeling is part of paganism, and it was the idea of how fairies could, in the middle of the night, steal a human child and replace it with a fairy that had some kind of deformity. That's not necessarily the way Shakespeare uses changeling. It's just supposed to represent a boy, though Fairy Titania talks about how she feels this sense of obligation to raising this child because one of her entourage died in childbirth, so therefore she feels that she needs to raise the boy. Oberon wants the child probably because of jealousy and also for power plays. Titania dares to say no. In other words, she defies her husband and it's similar to the way that Hermia defies her father. So this would be very eyebrow raising. In fact, not only does Titania defy her husband, but she has forsworn her marriage bed, which means that she's denying him sexual relations. He's furious, and he's decided that he's going to enact revenge by getting his servant, Puck, another fairy, to take some love juice, to put it on Titania's eyes, to basically distract her so that when she falls in love with the first thing she sees. This is also another reference to love, that when we are in love, we tend to no longer pay attention to those things that we once cared about, such as children, for instance. And Puck does do that. Puck also decides at that point that he's going to take matters into his own hands when he observes a character named Bottom, who is at the bottom of the social scale because he's a laborer, but he also acts like a bottom, or for lack of a better word, an ass. And we see how Bottom is rehearsing a play about love, it turns out, and this is going to be very deliberate on Shakespeare's part, Pyramus and Thisbe, and it's about love gone awry, which is what A Midsummer Night's Dream is. It's about all of the conflicts and turmoil associated with love. Well, Puck thinks that Bottom is such an ass that he literally turns him into an ass, which leads to all kinds of comedic potential as the play progresses. And those are the major characters that we are introduced to over the course of the play. And Act 1 establishes that love is fickle, that love can be an arranged love or it can be a romantic love, and that love oftentimes involves power struggles. When we move to Act 2, we move to the forest, which is Wild and Untamed, where Hermia and Lysander decide to run away. And Helena informs Demetrius that this is what Hermia is doing. In her convoluted logic, Helena believes that if she tells Demetrius that Hermia has run away with her love, Demetrius will be so thankful to her that he will want to have a relationship with her, Helena, again. Of course, that's completely irrational. And that also illustrates one of the elements of love, that love can be irrational. It also serves as a plot device to get both Demetrius and Helena into the forest, along with Lysander and Demetrius. Bottom is already in the forest, and he's indicated that he and his cohorts are going to rehearse the play within a play, Pyramus and Thisbe, in the forest so that no one eavesdrops on them and they can have some privacy. And again, another plot device to get him into the forest. It's important to get all of the major characters into the forest. And at this particular point, obviously, Oberon and Titania, as fairies, are in the forest. Oberon basically has ordered Puck to use the love juice on Titania, and also he's decided to ask Puck to put the love juice on the man wearing the Athenian garb. Now, these are somewhat general instructions. What Oberon's intention is that he feels sorry when he eavesdrops on Helena and Demetrius. After all, Oberon has his own love problems. And he wants to intervene, and he wants Demetrius to love Helena in the way that Helena loves Demetrius. Puck, either accidentally or purposefully, this is where the actor can make a decision as to how they want to play that particular role, chooses the man wearing the Athenian garb as Lysander, not Demetrius. After all, Puck is literally following orders, but Puck may also, because Puck likes mischief, have known darn well that he was supposed to put the love juice on Demetrius and decides to follow orders exactly. And what that means is that he has the possibility of putting the love juice on Lysander and creating all kinds of havoc, which is exactly what happens. And of course, Puck, with his own devices, decides to have a little bit of fun and turns Bottom into an ass. Fairy Titania wakes up at this point, and who does she see? The first thing she sees is Bottom, the ass, to indicate how easy it is when we are in love to fall in love with an ass, because love is blind. And then, of course, at this point, Lysander, which is the wrong man, loves Helena, and Puck needs to fix this mistake. So the love juice is now put on Demetrius, but it's never removed from Lysander. So we get a complete switch. At the beginning of the play, two men love Hermia, the short brunette. As the play progresses, because of love juice, we've got two men who are now in love with Helena, the tall blonde. And not only is this devastating news to Hermia, the short brunette, because she's used to being the center of attention, but Helena believes that she must be subject to some sort of terrible joke because no one has ever wanted her either. So now we've got both men loving Helena, no one loving Hermia, and the idea that love can be irrational. as we see with Helena basically telling Demetrius where Hermia is going. Love can be humiliating, as we see with Queen Titania falling in love with Bottom, who's a laborer and an idiot to begin with, but also a literal ass donkey at this point. And love is like a magic spell. In other words, that we can be controlled and manipulated by it. So when we finally get to Act 3, which would be the pinnacle of the height of tension of the play, former best friends Helena and Hermia are fighting, which goes to show how friendships can be destroyed over conflicts about love. And then Demetrius and Lysander also join in the fight. If this were a tragedy, basically all of these individuals would kill one another. But we know that this is a comedy, which means that we need to have a happy ending where no one dies, and we've got the promise of marriage at the very least, if not marriage itself. So while we're seeing that love leads to conflicts and destroys friendships and is blind, we need to have a resolution. And that's what we get in Act 4, the comedic resolution of the happy ending, where no one dies and most of the couples are going to be content. And in fact, this is what ends up happening. Hermia and Lysander are going to get their way, and they're going to be able to be a couple and pursue their romantic love. Now, Aegeus is unhappy, but basically he's the only one who's unhappy as the father figure. And now Helena and Demetrius are also happily in love. And I don't know if this is necessarily a happy ending for Demetrius, because at the beginning of the play, he no longer loved Helena. But one could say that it's a restoration of order, because prior to the play, he had a relationship with Helena. So perhaps he has some obligation to Helena. Fairy Oberon gets the changeling boy. This is somewhat problematic if we wanted to read the play from a feminist perspective, thinking about, well, Hermia gets her way, so shouldn't Queen Titania get her way? No, Queen Titania is humiliated and basically has to lose power over the boy. And Titania has to come to the realization that she basically has been in love with an ass, which illustrates, if nothing else, that love is complicated, love is unpredictable, and love is also very surprising. It would seem that the play ends at this point, or could end, but we know that a Shakespearean play is supposed to have 5 acts. So what happens in the 5th act? We get that play within a play, the Pyramus and Thisbe performance put on by Bottom and his cohorts. And that said, this is very typical technique of Shakespeare to put on a play within a play, that the minor play would mirror what's happening in the major play. So it's very meta in some respects, drawing attention to the fact that we are watching a play. And this play, Pyramus and Thisbe, happens to be about love gone awry, which is exactly what we've seen thus far in Midsummer Night's Dream, and also about the lack of insight that occurs with love, because all of the characters who are watching the play within a play, Hermia and Helena and Lysander and Demetrius and Theseus and Hippolyta, all of them laugh at the play because it's absurd and ridiculous. But they never once considered that they were acting in an equally absurd or ridiculous way in real life, so to speak, in just a few acts earlier. And if we wanted to expand this further, it's really about us as audience. That if we watch the play Pyramus and Thisbe and we laugh and we never stop to consider that we ourselves have been idiotic in love and have been irrational and have been blind and have done many of the things that have happened to the characters in this play, then what Shakespeare is suggesting is that we've learned nothing from watching A Midsummer Night's Dream, and that this play is supposed to be for us to realize how irrational and ridiculous we can be in love. So love is ignorant and love is stupid. But love is also fun. And that's one of the things that we see throughout the play itself with our happy ending. Shakespeare was a consummate showman. So if he had an opportunity to be able to, let's say, promote himself, he would definitely do so. And that's one of the reasons why Pyramus and Thisbe exists, because it's supposed to be an example of bad playwriting and bad play acting. And this is supposed to be in reference to Shakespeare's competition. That what Shakespeare is showing us is the kind of acting and the kind of writing we would see with his competition. We could see something absurd and ridiculous like Pyramus and Thisbe, or we could see something good like A Midsummer Night's Dream. And if it's no surprise, perhaps, to you that Pyramus and Thisbe has a plot that's very similar to Romeo and Juliet, a play that scholars think Shakespeare wrote the same year that he wrote A Midsummer Night's Dream. So there are a good number of parallels there. And then the play ends with Puck apologizing, but it's an insincere apology. He talks about how he's an honest Puck. Puck is hardly honest. And he asks the audience basically to give applause. If we be friends, Puck will make amends. Puck has oftentimes been seen as a kind of Shakespeare figure, controlling and manipulating the action, much like Shakespeare would be. And it makes sense that Puck, in the guise of Shakespeare, would be asking for forgiveness, because probably a lot of people were offended by watching the play. At least Shakespeare's Equal Opportunity, when he suggests that we all act like idiots in love, including kings and queens. And Queen Elizabeth, the queen of the time, would probably have been in attendance, and she would have noted that as well. So this was a smart move on Shakespeare's part to apologize for any offense that might have occurred. And if you were watching this particular production, then you probably noticed that the actors who play Fairy Queen, Oberon and Titania, are also the same actors who play King Theseus and King Hippolyta, to illustrate that there are lots of similarities between these two couples. And in fact, if you think about all of the couplings, they represent all the different stages of relationship. So what we've got with the fairies, King Oberon and Queen Titania, they're a married couple, and they're bickering. And then what we get with King Theseus and King Hippolyta, there's some tension, they're engaged. And then, of course, we get the romantic idealized nature of love when we get the Hermias and the Helenas and the Demetriuses and the Lysanders when they're courting. So these are all of the stages of love. Note that Puck is not involved in a love relationship, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why Puck is able to remain distant enough to control and manipulate the action and not be involved in love himself. Even Bottom, who is an idiot, is ultimately involved in a love relationship. But he's such an idiot, it never once occurs to him that it would be strange that he, as a laborer, would be any kind of romantic interest to the Queen of the Fairies, who is supposed to be considered to be superior to even humans during the time period. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the themes and some of the issues that were going on with each of the 5 acts. I wanted to finish up next class by talking about some language in the play itself, and then move us forward to A Raisin in the Sun, which is a much more contemporary play set in the United States. So I think you're going to find that it's going to be much more accessible than the translation we saw of Oedipus, or even this version or any version that you might have seen and read of A Midsummer Night's Dream. So that's where we're headed next class, and I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. Next class, we'll finish up with Shakespeare, and we'll move forward to Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun. Take care. Bye-bye.